with your planning and your operation in Uganda, East Africa's jewel or the jewel of Africa. I'm delighted to be joined by excellent speakers who a moderator will introduce briefly. I do welcome you to join us, and this is streamed live on Twitter and YouTube. Please send your questions email me, and we'll share them with the panelists. I think when we think about elections in Africa, I think one of the controversies is the question whether elections are really important for the continent. They are too expensive. Can we? And most of the time, the dispute, what happens after elections is disputes, which sometimes carries on, and sometimes it costs lives. A lot of people and economic activity is disrupted, and most time the process is not fair and free. So are elections necessary for the continent? Is it a time for us to explore a democratic process that is informed by African values? We've seen situations both in America and the UK, and who are the founders of democracy and who introduced democracy in our continent. And clearly, I think this is time for us to start really exploring other ways of really leading Africa using values and look, this is up for discussion, and I'm hoping our panelists will help us respond to this. But apart from the politics, we'll look at the economic prospects, and as Africa's welcomed the new free trade agreement, we'll look at how this election and its outcome affects this, and how Uganda is prepared to participate in the free Africa trade agreement. Allow me now to introduce Mr. Boasen Amofaye. Mr. Boasen Amofaye is a financial journalist and the CEO of Frontier Africa Reports. This is a Pan-African platform that produces African financial news and Africa market outlook. Mr. Boasen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Agnes, and it's good to have our panelists and other participants who are coming through for today's event. Of course, it's a very important one based on what Agnes, our partner at GBS Africa, talked about for this very particular election. We just saw a very peaceful transition of what you call the continued electoral process and administration in Ghana, here in West Africa. And that was considered to be very peaceful by all ramifications, even though the former president who recontested says he's going to the courts. But as we've seen, a very less volatile elections, and Ghana is being touted as the poster boy of stable political transition on the continent, at least West Africa by all measures. Uganda is very important for East Africa, alongside all the countries. The one political stability in East Africa goes around everyone. And now there are issues around fracas, protests on social media. Things have heated up in Uganda to the point that this afternoon, the United States has withdrawn its observer mission for this election in Uganda. So this is very important. My core question is, what do Ugandans want from this election? So permit me to introduce my three panelists, and I'm sure if I say four, because Agnes is from East Africa as well, so she's one of the member of the East African community. But I will start from Joseph Ochieno, who is the writer and a former New African contributor and a commentator on Africa political affairs. He's one of the early members of the Ugandan People's Congress under former President Milton Obote. If there's anyone who understands who has a foot on the ground, that is Joseph. Thank you so much, Joseph, for coming. I also introduce Eshban Kwesiga, who's the head of development and policy at Chapter 4 Uganda. We appreciate what you guys are going through, as this is your country story we're talking about. No one can tell it much better than those of you who are citizens of the country and who are on the ground. Head of development and policy at Chapter 4. Eshban has done quite a whole lot of work in strategic thinking, tactical strategic thinking and action around organization's agenda, and has done a whole lot around Parliamentary Watch, democracy, human rights think tank, and all of that, and comes with a whole lot of credibility and resume on policy, think tanks, alternatives, and all of that in terms of what he does. My other panelist is Jacqueline. Jacqueline Pima is a trade governance and policy expert. She's the founding partner of Pro Trade Africa Consulting, which focuses on trade, investment, regional integration on the continent. So I'm happy to have all of you here. I think I have a very balanced panel here with 2 women and 2 men. So I'll just discount myself as just the speaker. Okay, a nice one, but very important conversation, by the way. Let me start with you, Joseph Ochieno. You were founding one of the early members of the Ugandan People's Congress under Milton Obote. So Joseph, bring us up to speed now when you say Uganda's political history. Put it in context for us, where we are right now, and some historical perspectives would be good for about a few minutes.
Thanks for having me. But, this is amazing. I did a piece hardly a month ago in which I reminded Africans and the rest of the world that it would be 40 years just about now since the last elections that, in my opinion, I consider the last open, free and fair, competitive multi-party elections in Uganda. But of course, that is substantially contested. It's contested because of many reasons, but it's also the elections that saw Mr. Museveni go to the bush, challenging the election results, but in the bush rather than in the courts of law. But that said, really, very, very sad that historically, if you put East Africa together, Uganda should really be the democracy boy. It has been argued, you mentioned Milton Obote, for the purposes of this conversation. He actually told me that in the 60s, Kenya banned political parties and went party state. Tanzania banned political parties and went party state. Uganda did not, except Uganda was a bit unfortunate that they had a combination of issues with some of the opposition leaders are jailed. Too much for this topic. Amin then came to power. And the perception we had was a very different one. But quickly, immediately after the overthrow of Idi Amin in 1979, Ugandans actually very freely and willingly went for another competitive multi-party elections. At the time, Tanzania and Kenya were not. So really, in terms of the context of multi-partyism, Uganda is possibly the unlucky guy. Having that record and bringing it forward to where we are today with Mr. Museveni after 40 years, you're quite right about the developments, including with our friends in America. It is actually extraordinary that I just about managed to get access to this program because social media has been blocked out. I've been blocked out in the last 18 hours. So it's very sad. Generally, Agnes was making an important point that I cannot really miss. I think as Africans, I totally believe that the future is competitive, free, fair, competitive multi-party elections. In the 90s, when I was much younger, we were having debates about multi-partyism in Africa. Ghana was experimenting with Uganda, the so-called alternative methods of democracy. And Nigeria was a permanent military. And my assistant then in London insisted that Africa could never be governed through multi-party system. But in a very strange way, Ghana is now a relative model. Nigeria is just about to make it. And those of us in East Africa, possibly we are now beginning to look from that end. The point is this, multi-partyism is the way forward. I think as Africans, we need to simply grow beyond either chauvinism, identity politics, the militarism that we thought was the dominant factor in West Africa, which seems to be not wanting to leave Uganda. Registration in which we have pluralist competition of ideas. And once we're able to do that, we have a government with the mandate of the people, and people are able to wait for another 4 years or another 5 years, it will be possible. Quick closure. The elections, I think about 10 years ago in Ghana, which was very, very narrowly about a coup. I understand it from very thorough sources that actually security officials from Ghana opted to call both parties together and simply say one side had to concede in the best interest of the country. That is something that Uganda is yet to learn. And the only reason why Uganda cannot learn that is that the security system in this country, just as the political governing class is created out of NRM system, somebody within this organization needs to grow up and grow out of the system and allow Ugandans to be part of Uganda, including themselves, even if then they're the dominant force. Somebody needs to be able to tell Mr. Museveni that I don't know who that is going to be. I think I'm just giving a tiny little glimpse, which makes Uganda slightly more different from Kenya or Tanzania, because here we have a democracy, if you like, but that emerged out of a system from one individual, meaning that the army, the police, and all the organs are one system. Very different from Kenya and Tanzania.
Thank you so much, Joseph Ochieno. We appreciate that background. But I'm going to ask Eshban, who obviously much younger than yourself, Joseph, if I know I'm correct with that.
Yeah,
just looking at
indeed, yeah.
him, just looking at him on Zoom. So I'm just going to ask him if what we are seeing in Uganda right now is a struggle between between the past and the future of Ugandans in terms of President Museveni came into power 35 years ago. I was just around my 20s that time, just early 20s to speak. So, so many Ugandans were not even born when he became the president. So I'm sure Eshban will be one of those who will be thinking, I'm sure, whether he's 35 or 40, look, this is the president they've always known. But here is one of the main challenges, believing that the incumbent president belongs to historical Uganda, and that he represents, that is Bobby Wine believes that he represents the young generation of the future. So is this a struggle between the past and the future, Eshban?
Well, that's an interesting question. Is this the struggle between the past and the future? And I think that previously, when people in Uganda discussed the elections, they had assumed that it would essentially be a struggle between the past and the future. But since then, I think that new dynamics have gotten into this election. But to answer your question first, I have to answer the question of what do Ugandans want in this election? And first, we have to profile who are the players and what are the stakes.
Yes, the point around who are the players and what is at stake. I guess
Ugandan is an 18-year-old girl who may not be eligible to 5%.
Yeah, please go ahead, Eshban.
Am I still on?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so as that about 40% of the country is registered to vote, but of that 40%, a small fraction, about 25% of them are in the city. Another 75% of them live outside the city and outside urban dwellings. So the average voter in Uganda is really somebody that stays outside the city and is under 35 years old. What does this kind of person want? They probably want the same things that everybody wants: access to education, infrastructure, healthcare. But this voter is different in the sense that they have access to information and the media. They probably have a radio at home, or they have a smartphone that's connected to WhatsApp. So they have access to information and media in ways that the quintessential textbook villager or peasant does not have. So in many ways, they are young. They are young. They live outside the city, and access to information and the internet has really pushed their aspirations far beyond what the state is able to offer. But if you go to Google and you feed in Uganda's GDP, you'll see a very beautiful curve that starts in 2000, especially around 2000, and goes all the way up to 2019 or 2020. That shows incredible economic performance. At least that's what Google shows us. But when you talk to young people, when you talk to Ugandans, I think that those opportunities that are supposedly as a result of increased GDP are not being felt on the ground. So what you have in Uganda is a state or an individual who believes that they have provided incredible economic growth and that they should get a medal for it. And what you have on the other hand is very young people who say that they do not feel this economic growth within their lives. And because of access to the internet and to media, want better opportunities that they are able to see on the internet and how they are able to see other countries live. So in a sense, in many ways, you're right that this is a fight between the old and the young, but that wouldn't be all. I think that to understand this political contestation here in Uganda, today I was thinking and asking a bunch of friends, what are the issues that have defined this election? And you'd be surprised that health, education, infrastructure, none of those issues have truly defined this election. The government had fairly good performance on how it managed the COVID crisis here in Kampala, but even that narrative has been lost. The thing that has defined this election has mostly been political violence that has been fomented against mostly young opposition players by the state and the military. So in many ways, it looks like a fight between the old and the young, but really it's a fight about opportunities, regardless of who's old, who's young, because you have people in their mid-40s who, identify with, say, the Bobby Wine movement because of, the perpetual desire for opportunities that they think that the state has been unable to provide.
I appreciate that, Eshban, for bringing us in there. So these opportunities, let me ask Jacqueline about these opportunities that Eshban's talking about. These are opportunities for financial inclusion, for growth and development, growth beyond the GDP numbers and what have you. Do you think these stories are beginning to resonate across Africa? If you look at the Tanzania last election, it looks like it's all about these young population that wants a new world, so to speak, in quote and unquote, which it looks like the old political order are not ready or willing to give to them. But not just they want opportunities, they also want the political space as well to also express themselves.
Absolutely. One of the things that I agree with Mr. Kwesiga about was the definition and the divergence of our voter, our electorate. And the urban people, the urban dwellers who have access to this information and are able to make decisions for themselves are going to be more vocal about it. But if you look at the local investment in the country, it has already been affected by COVID-19 and the lockdown and the border closure. So there has been a lot of loss of job opportunities. It has stifled entrepreneurs, but this is not a new story. So COVID-19 and the restrictions that came with it just magnified the issues that entrepreneurs and investors have been dealing with. So speaking specifically about local investors, not FDIs, we have seen a massive unrest and complaints and various issues when it came to, for example, rent with the malls or just the closure, the border movement between our countries, and it's becoming, it has been an issue for government, for the electorate for the longest time. So what I have seen happening is the frustration of the entrepreneur, of the 35-year-old that we are talking about, who needs to see that the government actually cares and listens and actually implements what his interests are, is becoming is restless and wants to have a political voice. And therefore, more young people are getting into politics for that reason, but also because they do not see what they have been voting for this the last 3 or 4 elections being put in place. So even when you talk about FDIs, foreign investment flows, the records with UNCTAD have shown that for the past maybe 4 years, there's been a growing trend for investment in Uganda, albeit, in comparison to, say, Kenya, it hasn't been as good. We could do better, but the biggest driver for this FDIs is actually the oil and gas industry. It doesn't also reflect locally that this investment is trickling down, the benefits is trickling down to the local Ugandan, even with the rates of employment or other issues. And then one of the areas that we see that Uganda has 77% of its population is workforce in agriculture, but that area has still not grown to the level that gives the growth, economic growth and livelihood of the Ugandan, any notable thing. So there are issues there that investors and Ugandans are really fighting for and have been doing that for the last several elections. So it needs to be changed, and it's one of the drivers of the decisions. I mean, it's one of the decisions for the drivers for decision on who they want to elect this time.
Interesting perspective from you, Jacqueline. Let me quickly touch back on with Joseph on the political development and personalities within the Ugandan space. And Joseph, because of your experience and all of that, I'm giving you this question. The discontent that we see in Uganda, is it with President Museveni as an individual? Is it because some folks believe he's outgrown, there's no new weapon in his arsenal which he can use to move the economy forward? Or is he discontent with the administration in terms of the cabinet members and other government officials around him? Or is it with this political party itself? Where is this discontent very strong that this change is coming through, and who is resisting it really?
I think it's a combination of all that. If we are seeking democracy, 35 years is an extremely long time. These guys could have picked us from zero, and in fact, they suggest, particularly to the young 30-year-olds, that they found Uganda at nothing in 1986, which is an absolute nonsense. You can assume that we started from zero and they've taken us to heaven. But 35 years is an extremely long time. So that alone change, the guys who defined and designed the democratic processes, they suggest that every 5 years, you suggest a taste, and you put people through a process in which they're able to do what you would call the balance sheets to the voters. So it's basically just that. People are just tired of this guy. Now, one is Museveni, an old guy whose age we just guess is 77, number one. And by the way, he started engaging in politics at the time younger than Robert Kyagulanyi, that he taunts, and possibly around the age of Milton Obote, who was an excellent prime minister, I would say. Of course, that's a different topic. In their 30s. So one, Mr. Museveni himself. Number two, the system. As I told you at the beginning, this is a monolithic system, and most Ugandans simply just about waking up to it. I suggest, for example, the parliament that is going to be elected from tomorrow is purely, I call it the NRC, the National Legislative Assembly, which was the equivalent of their parliament when they came in 1986. But just in change of name. The army, they simply changed the name. The police, they're actually now militarizing it. It's a one system. Now, corruption. Yes, the economic growth is basically Uganda turning into, a peripheral capitalist market for people. The figures, as my young brother suggested earlier, impressive. But the reality is very different. You realize that I'm on my way to rural Uganda, where I was the other day, and you go down there and you talk about the agriculture that I saw in the 70s when I was growing up as a young man. You really know that this country has turned into a sweatshop for Chinese, a sweatshop for a few privileged guys, and this guy continues to recycle, because you talk about a system. Men and women who've been accused of corruption, their guys get away with it. The average young guy in Kampala will be shot at the leg. It is just a system that has lost ideas. They're full of impunity. I don't know anything new that Mr. Museveni and his system can offer Ugandans today, except, of course, the reality is this, I must say, that considering what the political situation is, I am not quite sure whether it is fair to say that possibly they've lost it all. Because by and large, they still have genuine support, which support will have many cases been bought, would have been through patronage, and in many other cases, but support where people don't know anything else. And then there is this new support here. On my way out of Kampala in Mukono, you see these guys, military guys marching in military fatigue as if there is a war, but it's simply an election tomorrow. Fear and scare. There are people, including some of my relatives, who would simply tell you that actually they would rather this guy stays than actually face another mini war. So people are tired of Museveni. The issue is, can they, quote, trust Robert Kyagulanyi when we have Robert Kyagulanyi as a candidate who's now seriously contending? Or is it a party like FDC, which was Dr. Besige's party, which was nearly the next government and it wasn't? Or is it some guy that the Jackies will say, Mugisha Muntu, his former army general, who's now turned into a decent guy in suits, and Uganda say, can we trust him? I think that is the mix of the tragedy facing our country. That while you have Museveni on the one hand, there's Chagulanyi who's mobilized a critical mass of the people today. But then there is the rest of the other. And what does it mean? It means that actually Uganda's by and large don't know, but all they simply need and want is change. Because to be quite frank, considering my own experiences and my own political depth and thought, that I don't know what the alternative is in terms of depth of ideas. And that is what Uganda needs. And that's indeed what Africa needs.
I know, but the point is that the only place to test and which people can express themselves is through the ballot box. So indeed, all the candidates we're talking about here, including the incumbent president, His Excellency President Museveni, they're all Ugandans. All of you are Ugandans, by the way. So the best place where you go is to the polls. You know the candidates, you know their parties behind them, you have all of that. So I'm asking Eshban, so is it difficult, therefore, for Ugandans to go to the poll? I'm not sure anyone will be looking over my shoulder if I'm the one who is thumbprinting on the cards tomorrow. So are you sure that the Electoral Commission will do a free and fair job and that Ugandans can say, look, despite anybody marching around, I'm going to the polls and I'm going to put my fingerprint on the ballot for the right individual to lead the country forward? Is that so difficult?
No, it's not. And tomorrow, many people will wake up in the morning and go to their polling stations and cast the ballot. What happens is what's important to consider is some of what has happened before the polling date and some of what will happen after the polling date. So for example, before the polling date, because of COVID, all public rallies were banned. Presidential candidates and many political players were asked to hold their campaigns via TV or radio. So that means that a candidate has to raise money to be able to speak to the electorate. The president, on the other hand, the law requires that all media houses, TV or radio, provide him airtime if he wants to address the nation in matters of national urgency or matters of national importance. So the ground was already not leveled for them because the incumbent has many advantages that allow him to physically access locations that other candidates can, but also allowed airtime, to address the nation. So he gets to campaign several times over. What happens after on the polling date? Like I said, many people will wake up and they'll go to the polling stations. The thing that would concern me would be voter rigging. And I can tell you that all sides, all political parties are involved in it. And most of them, very many of them, rig in the areas where they have strong support. So, the president will rig in the areas where he has a lot of support. The opposition are also likely to rig in the areas where they have a lot of support.
This is very interesting because I'm trying to understand how we got to a point. Agnes, you want to say a few words here to the point, because none of the candidates are foreigners, they are known. So whether they campaign for a whole year or they have TV or radio platforms, these are individuals within the country that the ordinary people know. Is it such a difficult thing to vote and get a credible account of what happened? When right now the US is saying they're canceling the observer mission to these elections, that doesn't look good.
Well, their observer mission in the US 4 years ago wasn't great anyway, so no tears there. So the question is it so difficult? I tell you what, in a lot of our countries, Uganda included, citizens in some way believe in the demo. I think they do. They believe in the democratic process. So they will go and vote peacefully. But as Kwesiga says, it is what happens after this is done. It's the counting of vote. Is the Electoral Commission credible enough? The institutions, are they strong enough and independent to be able to take that process forward? So it's not a difficult thing. And that's why I ask whether if you have to go and queue for 8 hours to cast a vote for a candidate that you think is the right person to lead the country, I ask, if the process after that is not free and fair, what's the use of doing it anyway? It's costly. The amount of money that is going to be used for this election could be deployed to Uganda's healthcare, perhaps, or Uganda's infrastructure. That's my thoughts. You know, look, Museveni is not going to this vote, to this election looking to lose. Of course, everybody goes to an election looking to win, and it will do whatever it takes to try and win the vote. But as Joseph says, what's the alternative? You know, is it the young man musician? Is it Dr. Bessinger? What is the alternative for Uganda? And apart from that, apart from what is the alternative, I think the process to me is just too chaotic, and we need to reconsider what, instead of going through this chaotic process, can we just have a baraza where the elders can sit down and decide, look, I think for the next 5 years, we agree, you know, like what we're doing in Kenya, you know, we agree that candidate A will do it for the next 5 years, you know, because it really, the chaos involved, look, the internet is suspended, the economic disruption that elections in Africa cause, and even after, in some cases, fatalities. Is it worth it? Is there an alternative? And what is that alternative? And Joseph, who is a political scientist, cannot even tell us what is that alternative. So for me, I look to Uganda, I look to Ugandans, you know, and wish that they have a free and fair elections. And once this is done, I do hope that we can all sit down and look for those alternatives that we keep talking about.
I'm going to come to you, Jacqueline, in just a moment. Thank you, Agnes. But let me get back to Joseph and ask him about the political fraternity of the godfathers in East Africa. President Kenyatta, the Magufuli, the rest of them. What are you hearing on the ground? How are they interested in Uganda's political space, or who becomes the next president? Are they sticking their nose in the affairs of Uganda as far as this election is concerned? Well, what do you know? What are you hearing on the ground?
Yeah, I must say to Agnes that the alternative is the competitive multi-party democracy. There is no other alternative. And I think as Africans, we just have to learn how to lose and learn how to win and win responsibly. I know that the space is not here. I will be doing some talks beyond COVID within Uganda and across East Africa on the pluralist policy and the history of these campaigns, and to simply say that this is the future. In terms of the region, actually, Museveni, unfortunately, I would say, happens to be the father of the region at the moment, except that his young boy, Kagame, now no longer listens to him. So that one, I think, pinches him. But I think Kagame would be listening and watching with very massive interest. In fact, I suspect with authority that I would rather I would rather it is not Museveni as the president the day after tomorrow. But for the rest, in terms of Kenya and Tanzania, they've had mixed relationships. I don't want to go beyond the diplomatic, but quite frankly, I don't really think for the two, Kenya and Tanzania, it necessarily matters who wins. In fact, I know Tanzania wouldn't worry very much whoever wins these elections, nor would Kenyatta this time. But I think 5-10 years ago, I know that Kenyans and a few others would have wanted Museveni to continue. Up north in the South Sudan, I know they would want Museveni to continue, and I think you get the hints of what I'm talking about. Generally, though, I think as part of the conversation we're building, Uganda's elections, whoever wins, should really not matter strategically for the whole of East Africa, as long as East Africa, beyond the individual leaders, push aside their self-interests. I think what would matter, though, is if there is instability in Uganda, there would be instability in East Africa, because as it happens, Uganda is central to the geopolitical strategic base for actually Anglo-America, if I put it that way. And I think most of us actually know what we're talking about, and that continues. I actually even think that is the bad manners that was taught to Mr. Museveni, and that compelled him to think that the rest of the world could not do without him. So in a way, we are sort of paying for that. But generally, I think, of course, we want peace and stability in this country. The neighboring countries would suffer, both in terms of their security and definitely economically. And of course, one or two politically, if there's instability in Uganda. Generally, I think the whole of East Africa wants peace. I know definitely the majority of the leaders within the region want a transition in this country, and they want a safe transition. Whether or not they are going to be able to achieve that, the kind of hope that most Ugandans actually want and looking for, I do not know.
Jacqueline, this is not a particularly good time to run into any political Titanic situation in any country on the continent, not especially East African community. If you look at the new AFCFTA, Uganda has ratified, and everyone, and if you look at the East African trade community, the bloc and everything, it looks like from the outside that it's a region that things are going pretty well, so to speak. So do you think local businesses are prepared? They will be able to move through this political warm, hot waters, as it were, to the other side and continue to and be able to concentrate on this very important intra-Africa trade, the new also coping with COVID-19. I'm not sure they can ill afford any political turmoil at this point in time, added to already stressed life and living they already have on their hands.
Absolutely, I agree with you on that. The local business trade in general thrives best when there is peace and security. However, trade is also core, it's a livelihood of the people. And in East Africa, Kenya is, for example, our biggest trading partner now. But the rest of the East African community as well, because of the proximity. So before, as it was before, our biggest trading partner was Europe. And with the integration, we then, have easier trade relations with our neighbors. And the way that if anything happens during this election that worst case scenario gets to an election violence, it will threaten the trade with the other two neighbors as well, because the Northern Corridor services Rwanda, for example, and DR Congo and South Sudan. Everything that's coming in will go through either Mombasa or Dar es Salaam and through to Uganda and through to the other neighbors. So that will be affected if these elections do not go well. But also with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, with Uganda and President Museveni being the godfather of the integration, he was one of the presidents that were there when it was restarted. He has gained a lot of respect, and there's an expectation that he would also continuously support or hold the partner states together in a way. And I think he has done that for a while, for as far as possible, and has also enabled us to push to be the first countries to push for the ratification, and also now trading, which was supposed to start in a few weeks ago, 1st January. For the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. On paper, I will say this, on paper, it is possible to start, but the private sector, especially in Uganda, is not as aware of the AFCFTA as we should be. We're still grappling with the East African community. I know that the performance of the ESC is much better than the rest of the regional blocs, but it is not good enough. There are still issues with non-tariff barriers, with all there's a border closure. Let me bring it down to an example. There's a border closure that happened in 2019 between Rwanda and Uganda that is still has to be resolved, and it affected trade, and the private sector, the traders complained. We made attempts, and now the political heads resolved to resolve it diplomatically. But up to now, that border closure issue has not been resolved. So when it comes to the AFCFTA, there are other technical issues that still need to be put in place. If we say, for example, trading, just one thing that requires for a Ugandan or a Ghanaian, in this case, to bring goods to Uganda, there's the one thing under the AFCFTA, there's the one thing that needs to be sorted out, origin certificate. That is not something that has been done because the schedule of goods, the schedule for taxes, or the agreement has not even been finalized. So there are those technical issues that need to be considered, and we commend we're not we commend the work that has happened so far, but there's still a long way for us to actually activate the AFCFTA, as well as the issues that are still stifling what could have been much more trade and movement of persons in the ESCA.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacqueline. Let me ask Eshban Kwesiga one very tricky question. Who do you think among the political opponents of President Museveni or the current incumbent administration, who amongst them do you think is politically and all that ready to hit the ground running in this post-election if he happens to win?
Oh, was that to me?
Yes. Yeah, who do you think, Kwesiga, who do you think among the contestants, aside the incumbent President Museveni, His Excellency, who amongst the other contestants do you think looks like ready-made, good to go right now?
So that's essentially the tragedy of this election, yes? Like I said earlier, it has not been based on any real issues. None of the candidates has had an opportunity to articulate what is their position on foreign policy, on foreign direct investment. What do they think of universal health education? What do they think of how would they have handled COVID?
So what's everybody doing on social media? What's everybody doing on social media? Bobby Wine and everybody making noise on Twitter and Facebook, and it looks like everybody's looking like they are happy, ready to go.
I tell you, there's a hashtag on Twitter right now being driven by the opposition that says that we are removing a dictator. So the opposition has articulated that this is their agenda. They are removing an incumbent who has been in power for a very long time. So yes. I bet you could ask many people. These candidates have not really gotten an opportunity to articulate, or if they have chosen to discuss the violence that the state has meted upon them. And this is why I said earlier on in this conversation that this election has only been defined by one issue: political violence. Just like Joseph was saying, there's a lot of things that that candidates could have articulated on how they would interact with the neighboring countries. We have the Deputy President of Kenya, who has made more trips to Uganda than his principal. So there's a geopolitical relationship there, and I think that they might be interested in who runs for president or who wins the presidency here. We have an oil pipeline that was already signed with Tanzania that hasn't yet been constructed. So depending on who wins the election, that pipeline might go into the hanging. I mean, the contract was signed, but it could wait another 10 years. We have a beef with Rwanda, which is now open. And obviously the Rwandan government will be watching this election quite openly. In Congo, the Ugandan government has built roads that go inside that country now. Part of our infrastructure budget is used to build roads in Congo. Because of that geopolitical relationship, if a war with Uganda happens, Congo would most likely be the soil where it does. None of these candidates has been able to articulate how they would handle all these different issues. So it's very difficult to tell who is most likely to hit the ground running, because all we have seen in the news and political commentary has mostly been election violence.
So help me out, Joseph. Do you have any idea? You have poverty, you have infrastructure challenges. You need to close the social, or they call the gender gap. You need to get more women. You need to fix education. You need to fix primary health care. All the basics on the same. Then it doesn't look like, because we sit here and we say, oh yeah, it looks like this gentleman is ready. But now it looks like, Eshban says, it looks like nobody is ready.
You know, this might sound controversial, but actually it's quite clearly the case that I was hinting that actually that's part of the problem. But in order not to discredit the opposition, I'll take it back to Mr. Museveni and his long-term allies in the West. Mr. Museveni created a monolithic one-party system in this country that killed the political opposition. They killed the main established political parties, UPC and then DP at the time. And then many other people basically clapped, thinking that it was a battle for others, when Mr. Museveni was basically torturing others. Remember, I had to return to this country only after we had managed to defeat Museveni in court in 2005 by compelling him to open the political space and hence opening political parties. So really, many of these actors at the moment are literally trainee political party and trainee political leader organizations. And yet, to be fair, it does not necessarily need you to have 10 years of training on grounding in order to be this. It simply happens to be that actually none of these guys, in my opinion, actually has the big idea of an alternative Uganda, except we want institutions, we want good governance, we want to do away with corruption. We are tired of Mr. Museveni. Of course, those are the obvious things. Actually, those are the minimum basics. Quite clearly, in my opinion, the absence of who hits the ground running is the creation of Museveni and his backers over the last several years as part of the main strategy of Uganda. And yet, that having been said, to be fair again, I think whoever wins this election, and in fact, if it was in the event that it was not Museveni, I don't think it would necessarily matter who wins, because Ugandans are rather clever people. We would generally very much galvanize ourselves and forge a government. Remember, Museveni was a reject in 1980 general elections. He lost elections. He only had one member of parliament, went to the bush, and tortured our people in Luwero, gambled his way to power in 1986 with the ragtag army. And you know what? He's now here, and 40 years, 35 years later, and actually literally boasting that there's nobody else who can do this but him. So meaning, I don't think it's actually a big problem if there was an open space. The issue is, if it is not Museveni who wins, will the military allow whoever comes to power to create that space and be able to hit that ground? That is the question.
Joseph, so those who are in the political trainee program, what are they learning? How to rule, or now how not to rule? What are they learning? What's the most important to learn? How to do it or how not to do it? What have they learned?
I think my young brother Kwesiga is trying to suggest to you that they're actually learning how to get rid of this guy first before we think about ruling. But I want to suggest that on a serious note, no. Get rid of Museveni, it is actually possible to govern this country or any other country. I can tell you, we'll start on a better ground than South Sudan, for instance. Now, that is not really very good news, but I can tell you that this country, by the time Idi Amin came, I just want to tell the young watchers to power, Uganda had the best civil service on the continent. Some of those guys are old men, like one old former professor was having tea with at Makero the other day. They are still around, and some of them gave us some bits of ideas. A phone call away from some of us would actually encourage some of these guys and make sure that they do the right thing. And you know what? They're very likely to do much better than Mr. Museveni started from.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask you, my panelists, for 1 minute to round up. But again, Eshbert, I'm going to ask you, how do you respond to human rights issues associated with the election?
Please repeat that. How do you respond to?
Yeah, human rights abuses, human rights issues, which is been so reported everywhere around the election.
So first of all, I think that I need to explain what is the philosophy behind these human rights abuses and what have we seen. So we have a state, or we have an individual who has been in power for a very long time, who believes that he has delivered the economic progress that this country needs and should get a medal in return. And what he has gotten out of it, or what the result of it has been large, widespread political unrest. And I can tell you that within the state, there are many individuals who believe that that widespread political unrest is really the consequence of economic progression, that this is what happens when people move from being agrarian poor to becoming an emerging middle class, that they start to demand for more, and it manifests itself in political unrest. The examples given here are, say, countries like Singapore, which experienced the shortest time from being poor to reach almost 30 years. And in those 30 years, that country was on fire, consistent political unrest. And within the state, there's a wide philosophical belief that the only way to handle that kind of political unrest is violent suppression. And what we are doing as civil society and as human rights organizations is to make sure that people within the state understand that we will be there to document that violence. We will be there to keep track and record of who the perpetrators were and who the victims were, and that these kinds of actions and events will not happen in an environment of secrecy where there will be no accountability in future.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and being part of the panel. Jacqueline, what are your final thoughts on trade governance policies, and what have you, whoever wins these elections, that you would like to see moving forward?
Well, and one of the people, the presidential candidates whose manifesto impressed me the most because they paid attention to the issues of trade, governance, entrepreneurship, SMEs, and the sector, the economy of the people of Uganda, has been Mugisha Muntu. And I feel like one of the things that people are overlooking is that after the political elections, there is this life, because even if any of the candidates went, other than President Museveni, went through, there are these issues that will not go away, and we haven't had their opinion, and therefore we expect that there will be a gamble if they have not prepared for such issues. They have to take leadership of all of the institutions, internationally, regionally, that have been set up to allow the country to trade, to grow, to invest, and not just take leadership, but also propel it. So my plight, I guess, is to even the members of parliament who my hope is that regardless of the political divisions, we can turn our eyes to what actually matters, what actually will help the individual, the entrepreneur, the farmer in Uganda to make a good living out of their policies that they are going to create. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jacqueline. And finally, to Joseph, just to wrap up your thoughts, what's your reading of the political future of His Excellency President Uganda Museveni himself?
I think I wouldn't play God on that, but I think Mr. Museveni wants to stick around. Mr. Museveni wants to stick around unless and until he's able to get someone who guarantees his future, particularly along the lines of what Eshban was referring to, considering that he knows very well that he did not come to power through the ballot, and he has not governed freely through the ballot. I was one of those people who, in my conversations with some of his friends, actually, in the Western diplomatic circles, I actually thought 20 years ago that he would actually go about 15 or so years ago and go rather quietly and maybe get a medal for the process, and then maybe he would be calmer today. He missed an opportunity on that. Where we are at the moment, I think whatever is happening, including the human rights abuses, is an extreme of Mr. Museveni that we haven't really seen since almost the early part of his government. And so that makes it very difficult. I really hope, though, regardless, that outside these elections, a leadership emerges in this country, which is at the moment completely absent. A political leadership, unfortunately, I disagree with Jackie. The answer to global governance is political leadership. Politics is the most important game in town. It determines our economics and everything else. This country needs a political vision, a political leader, a political direction that enables all Ugandans to once again feel Ugandans together and think together in diversity and say that it is possible for us to fight for the future, having substantially disorganized our past and at the moment very, very much playing with our present. I really hope that leadership emerges. Whether or not it's from the current crop of leadership, I do not know. But since they are the ones who are presenting themselves, let's hope one of them emerges politically as a president. But with or without a president tomorrow, who is that leader? This country still needs a leadership, a voice, some kind of a Bob Marley, even if it were in music, but a leader.
Yeah, but what you've got in Uganda is a Bobby Wine, not a Bob Marley. But of course, whichever way you look at it, it's okay. Let's just listen to some good music. Thank you so much. It's been nice listening to all of you today. Joseph Ochieno, a very strong commentator on Africa's political affairs. Thank you so much for your time in Uganda. Stay safe, everyone. It's good to see you. Jacqueline, it's good to see you as well. Jacqueline Pima, thank you so much. From Trade Governance and Policy Expert, it's good to have you on the panel. And of course, Eshban Kwesiga, thank you so much, Head of Policy, Development and Policy at Chapter 4, Uganda. Maybe there's going to be a new chapter moving forward now. Maybe, I don't know. But it's nice one seeing you, all of you today. Thank you, Agnes. I'll leave the rest in your hands.
Thank you very much, Boston, for really moderating this session and bringing out the conversation from all our speakers. I want to thank you, just echo what Boston says in thanking you, Jacqueline, Joseph, and Ashburn, and really to wish you guys a peaceful process. We can only hope for a peaceful process, and I do hope after this is all over, as you all said, I think what matters is what happens after tomorrow. There is children wants to go to school, there's healthcare issues to deal with, infrastructure development that we need to focus on, and I think going forward, that's the Uganda we want to see. I hope you set an example for East Africa and the rest of the continent. I wish you well, and I wish you a peaceful process tomorrow. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very
Pleasure.
much. It's great having you. Thank you.